The rain ticked against the cabin's tin roof like impatient fingers, and the wood stove sighed with heat, sending amber light skittering across the scuffed pine walls. Outside, a winter wind prowled through the Oregon firs, hungry and loud. But inside, warmth held the darkness at bay like a promise that refused to break. Jack Mercer, 35 years old, a retired Navy SEAL with a hard-cut jaw, close-cropped dark hair, and eyes the color of stormwater, sat in a worn leather chair that still remembered better days. Across from him, his niece Emma sat curled on a faded ottoman wrapped in a quilt, too big for her freckles glowing in the firelight, curiosity bright enough to challenge the night. "Uncle Jack," she whispered, careful, as if the room might shatter. "You never talk about what happened after you came home. After you found those German shepherds in the woods. Everyone says you stopped something terrible. But you never told the whole story. Why did you go back when you could have walked away? If you feel that pull too. If you believe one choice can change a life, hit subscribe right now and join this campfire circle, because the next minutes will take you into a forest where mercy fought cruelty and won." Cold rain drifted through the pine canopy outside Bend, Oregon, turning the forest air into a clean, sharp breath that tasted like iron and wet bark. Jack Mercer drove with both hands steady on the wheel, but his mind refused to stay inside the truck. At 35, Jack looked older than his years in the ways that mattered, a hard-cut jaw shadowed by a short, disciplined beard, pale blue eyes that didn't blink often, and a posture that stayed ready even when he tried to rest. His hair was kept close on the sides, darker on top, the kind of cut that said he didn't like decisions lingering. He wore a faded olive jacket over a charcoal tee jeans, boots scuffed at the toes, civilian clothes chosen to look forgettable, though nothing about him truly was. 12 years in the Navy SEAL teams had carved a quiet violence into his reflexes. 3 years out had failed to sand it down. The thing that still haunted him wasn't the noise of battle, but the silence afterward. Those long hours where a man stares at a wall and wonders which part of him never came home. He told himself this trip was for calm, a few nights alone in a rental cabin, a reset. But calm had never been his strongest skill. The dirt road narrowed, the pines thickened, and the world seemed to swallow the sound of his engine as if the forest preferred secrets. Jack parked near a gate marked Private Timberland and cut the engine. The rain softened into a mist. He sat for a moment, listening to the tiny ticks of cooling metal, feeling the familiar pressure in his chest, the old ready switch that refused to turn off. Then he stepped out, boots sinking slightly into wet needles, and started walking. He carried no pack, only a small utility pouch at his belt, like an apology he wouldn't admit was one. The woods smelled alive and cold. His breath came out in slow clouds, controlled like he was still under orders. He followed a faint animal trail downhill, not sure why, only that. Something in the air felt wrong the way it did before an ambush, when birds stopped singing and the world held its breath. A gust curled through the trees and brought a new scent, sour fear mixed with something metallic. Jack stopped, his head tilted, listening. Their soft, strained sounds, not a howl, not a bark, but a whimpering that felt like a hand closing around the throat of the forest. He moved faster, silent, as his training had made him, slipping between trunks until the trail opened into a small clearing. What he saw there hit him like a blunt object. German shepherds, several of them, hung from low branches by crude ropes looped under their bodies, not high enough to break their necks, just high enough to steal their footing and leave them suspended, trembling, fighting for balance. Their coats were soaked black and tan fur, plastered to ribs that showed too clearly, muzzles flecked with foam and mud. One dog, older, maybe 5 or 6, had a graying mask around the mouth and eyes that were still fiercely intelligent despite the panic. Another, younger, 2, maybe 3, kicked weakly nails, scraping bark, the sound like a desperate prayer. Jack's stomach turned hot and cold at once. For a second, his mind tried to categorize it like a mission: number of victims, method of restraint, possible perpetrators, distance to road. Then the human part of him, still alive, still stubborn, surged up, furious. He muttered a humorless line to the rain, because if he didn't speak, he might roar, "Whoever calls this training deserves the same lesson." He moved, fast. He pulled a folding blade from his pouch and cut the first rope clean. The dog dropped into his arms with a heavy, wet thud, all muscle and fear. Jack lowered it to the ground, one hand firm on the scruff, not harsh, just anchoring. "Easy," he said, voice low, not a command, more like a promise. The dog's eyes locked on his, searching for the catch, the pain that usually followed a human voice. Jack cut the second rope, then the third, working down the line. Each dog hit the ground and staggered, legs shaking. One tried to crawl behind a stump, ashamed of its own weakness. Another pressed its body flat, expecting a boot. Jack's throat tightened. He had seen grown men do the same. A battered sign nailed to a nearby trunk swayed in the mist. The words were scrawled in black marker, half smeared by rain: discipline for K9 who won't obey. Beneath it, a second line: you learn or you hang. Jack stared at it, feeling his pulse climb. The forest seemed to lean in around him like an audience. He forced himself to breathe slowly. Rage was fuel, but it could also be fire that burned the wrong thing. He counted the dogs, 6 in total. All alive. Barely. The oldest one, the graying-muzzled shepherd, stepped forward on unsteady legs and sniffed Jack's hand. Its ears were ragged at the edges as if torn by past fights. Its eyes, amber-brown sharp, held a kind of stubborn judgment. Jack recognized that look. That dog wasn't broken. Not fully. "All right," Jack murmured, and something inside him softened by a hair. "You're the one who's going to keep the others breathing." The dog's chest rose and fell like a bellows. It gave a single rough bark, more warning than greeting, and then, as if deciding Jack was not the enemy, it turned its head toward the deeper woods. It took 3 steps, then looked back. Jack followed its gaze and saw faint tire ruts beyond the clearing, pressed into mud like a signature. The dog limped toward them, purposeful. Jack's instincts clicked into place. This wasn't random cruelty. This was a system. A message. A punishment staged where someone could return and watch. He felt the cold settle behind his ribs, the same cold he'd felt on night raids when something bigger was hiding just beyond the light. Jack crouched, scanning the tree line, then reached into his pocket for his phone with fingers that were suddenly very steady. No signal. Of course. The forest kept its secrets well. The rain intensified again, hissing on needles. The dogs huddled, shivering their eyes, flicking between Jack and the trees. Jack looked at them and made a decision that didn't feel heroic, just inevitable. "You're coming with me," he said quietly, as if speaking to fate itself. "And whoever did this is going to regret choosing my woods." He started gathering rope ends, checking knots, scanning for any trap. The older shepherd stayed close, limping but alert, watching the shadows like a veteran. Jack realized with a grim, almost comedic twist that he wasn't alone in the clearing. He was standing beside a pack of warriors who had been treated like tools, and they were still ready to fight for life. As he guided them toward the road, the forest behind them held its breath again, as if something unseen had noticed that the wrong man had walked into the story. Jack Mercer guided the 6 German shepherds out of the trees as if he were escorting ghosts into daylight, moving slow enough not to spook them, fast enough to outrun whatever cruelty might return. Mist clung to their coats like pale ash. The oldest shepherd, 5 or 6, heavy-boned, black and tan, with a silvered muzzle and torn ear tips, kept limping at Jack's left knee, with the grim dignity of an old soldier who refused to be pitied. Jack didn't name him yet. Names felt like promises, and Jack had learned the hard way that promises could get people killed. Still, when the dog glanced up with that hard, amber-brown stare, Jack felt a strange pull in his chest, like a hook catching on something human. In the truck bed, Jack laid down a tarp and coaxed the dogs in one by one, talking softly. Not commands, not baby talk, just steady words that said the world could stop hurting for a minute. One younger shepherd, 2 or 3, narrow-faced with a black saddle marking and trembling legs, flinched every time Jack's hand moved. Jack's jaw tightened. He remembered men who did the same when a door opened too quickly. On the drive toward town, rain streaked the windshield in long silver threads, and Jack's mind kept playing the clearing back like a cursed reel. He tried to breathe through it, but anger kept rising, hot, ancient, mythic, like a god waking up and finding his temple desecrated. He made himself focus on practical things: warmth, water, distance, time. He told himself this wasn't his war. Then he heard a faint whine from the back and realized he was lying. Some wars don't need bullets to be real. Some wars are fought with rope and fear and the slow theft of trust. At the first stretch, with a single bar of service, he called the nearest emergency animal clinic and put the phone on speaker so his hands could stay on the wheel. A calm voice answered, and Jack said, "I've got 6 shepherds in bad shape. Hanging trauma, hypothermia. I'm 10 minutes out." The voice didn't gasp or ask why, just told him where to pull in. That steadiness felt like a small mercy. When he arrived, a woman stepped out into the rain with a hooded coat and a purposeful stride, her expression sharp but kind, like a blade used for surgery, not harm. Dr. Olivia Brooks was in her early 30s, tall and athletic, warm brown skin and dark curly hair twisted into a practical bun that refused to fall apart even in weather like this. Her eyes were hazel alert, and she moved with the no-nonsense confidence of someone who had seen too much suffering to waste time on drama. "You're Jack Mercer?" she asked, voice steady, already reading the dog's posture the way Jack read terrain. Jack nodded. Up close, Olivia noticed his rigid shoulders and the way his gaze kept sweeping corners as if expecting an attack from a file cabinet. She didn't comment. She simply opened the clinic doors wider and called for Tex. Inside, bright lights made the dogs blink and shrink, and the younger ones tried to fold into themselves, but the older shepherd stood his ground, body angled between Jack and the rest as if to say, "If anything happens, it happens to me first." Olivia knelt carefully, letting the dog sniff her gloved hand. "Brave boy," she murmured, then glanced at Jack. "He's protecting the group. That's leadership, not aggression." Jack let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding, and the corner of his mouth twitched in a humorless half-smile. "Yeah," he said softly. "He's got better command presence than some guys I served with." The joke landed like a pebble in a deep well, small, but it made a sound, and that sound reminded Jack he was still alive. As the clinic staff carried the weaker shepherds to warm kennels, Olivia checked the older dog's neck and paused. "There's a mark," she said. Beneath wet fur barely visible was a tiny tattoo, numbers clean and deliberate, not the sloppy cruelty of a bored kid. Inventory. Jack felt his stomach turn again. Olivia's eyes hardened. "This is organized," she said. "Someone's tracking them." Jack's hands curled into fists so tight his knuckles whitened. He forced them open. Rage was easy. Control was harder. He watched Olivia work gentle hands, precise movements, a soft voice that didn't promise miracles but offered effort, and something in him recognized her as a different kind of warrior. A few minutes later, a woman in a dark green sheriff's deputy uniform entered with rein on her shoulders and a flashlight clipped to her vest. Deputy Megan Hart was late 20s, lean and long-legged, fair-skinned, with freckles across her nose and auburn hair pulled into a tight ponytail that swung like a warning. Her eyes were a clear gray-green, sharp as a hawk's, and her face carried the guarded patience of someone used to being underestimated and therefore never wasting motion. She took one look at the rope's burn marks on the dogs' bellies and the exhaustion in Jack's posture, and her expression went cold. "Doctor called it in," Megan said. "I'm Deputy Hart." "You found them?" Jack explained quickly how many to sign the tire ruts. He kept his voice even, but inside his thoughts were spiraling. The clearing felt like a trap, set not just for the dogs, but for any person with a conscience. Megan listened without interrupting, then asked the kind of question that made Jack glance at her with reluctant respect. Any chance whoever did this comes back to watch Jack's eyes flick to the window, to the rain, to the darkening line of trees beyond town. "Yeah," he said. "And if they do, they'll notice the leash is off." Megan's mouth tightened, half approval, half warning. "Don't go hunting alone," she said. "This isn't a movie." Jack almost laughed because the last thing his life had ever been was a movie. Instead, he nodded once stiff, like a man accepting a rule he didn't like. Olivia returned with a clipboard and a look that said she would not be sweet about bad news. "They're alive," she said, "but dehydrated, underweight, stressed. The smallest one has bruising consistent with repeated strikes." Jack's chest tightened until it felt hard to breathe. For a moment, he saw the younger shepherds flinch, and behind it a parade of other flinches from other lives. He swallowed it down. He refused to let the past steal his hands from the present. When Megan stepped aside to make a call, the older shepherd, still unnamed, still defiant, moved closer to Jack and pressed his damp head against Jack's thigh, not begging, not fawning, just anchoring. Jack looked down at him and felt the weirdest surge of tenderness, like sunlight hitting a scar. "All right, Jack," whispered quiet enough that only the dog could hear. "We do this the right way." Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the mountains, deep and slow, as if the sky itself were clearing its throat. Jack understood then that the forest had not handed him a random horror. It had handed him a doorway, and Jack Mercer, who had spent years kicking down doors for strangers, was about to walk through this one for 6 dogs who had never been allowed to trust anyone at all. The clinic's lights stayed too bright for the dogs' nerves, so the night felt like a long white hallway with no doors, but Jack Mercer didn't leave. He sat on a metal chair outside the kennel run, elbows on knees, watching the oldest shepherd breathe like a veteran sleeping with one eye half open. Olivia Brooks moved between exam rooms with the steady tempo of a medic in a storm, her expression calm, but her jaw set, and every time she passed Jack, she gave him a brief look that said, "Don't drown in rage, you'll need it later as fuel." Deputy Megan Hart returned from her phone call with Rain still clinging to her uniform. The fabric darkened at the shoulders, her ponytail damp and stubbornly tight. "I pulled your plates," she said, voice low so the dogs wouldn't hear the tension. "You're not local. You're Navy." Jack's eyes flicked up, sharp-guarded. Megan held his gaze without flinching. "My brother served," she added as if offering a small bridge. "Different branch, same ghosts. I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to stop whoever did this." Jack exhaled, something in him loosening by a hair. Olivia stepped in with a clipboard. "The tattoo on the leader dog is freshish," she said. "Not weeks old. Days. And it's not a pet ID, it's inventory." The word inventory landed like a curse. Jack's mouth went dry. Megan nodded once, already building a map in her head. "I called in animal control and a state investigator," she said. "Because if this is trafficking, it's bigger than my county." 10 minutes later, a man strode in who looked like he was carved from old oak, late 40s, broad-shouldered, thick forearms, neatly trimmed, dark beard, peppered with gray and tired brown eyes that had learned to stay gentle, even when his job demanded hardness. Officer Daniel Reeves wore a worn canvas jacket with the county seal and moved with the quiet confidence of someone used to walking into messes without making them worse. "Reeves," he said, offering Jack a handshake that was firm but not a dominance contest. "I handle cruelty cases, and I'm sorry you saw what you saw." Jack didn't correct him. That "saw" was the wrong word. Jack had felt it, tasted. It carried it into town in the back of his truck like a burden meant for altars. Reeves crouched beside the kennel, studying the dog's body language. "They've been trained," he murmured almost to himself. "Not well, not kindly, but trained. That means money, and money leaves footprints." Megan pulled Jack aside near the lobby window where neon from the clinic sign painted their faces in pale blue. "I need the exact coordinates," she said. "We'll sweep the site at first light." Jack's hands flexed. "They'll move the rest before morning," he replied. "Whoever did this didn't tie dogs to trees for fun. That was punishment. A message. There's more." Megan's eyes narrowed, not in doubt, but in calculation. "Then we don't wait for daylight," she decided. "We wait for them." Olivia's gaze snapped up. A stakeout, she asked, controlled anger flaring like a match. "With civilians." Megan glanced at Jack, then back to Olivia. "He's not a civilian in the way you mean," she said. Jack didn't like being volunteered for anything, but the old shepherd chose that moment to rise step to the kennel door and press his scarred muzzle against the bars as if nominating Jack by force of fate. Jack stared at the dog and felt something bitterly humorous twist in his chest. "Fine," he said, "but we do it smart." Reeves brought out a folded county map and a small handheld radio. He explained the terrain with practical precision. Service roads, ranch access points, a derelict storage yard 10 miles from the clearing. "There's been chatter," Reeves' admitted, voice like gravel. "Missing working dogs. People think they ran off. They don't run off. Not like this." Megan's phone buzzed. She checked it and her face tightened. "I've got an address," she said. "A tip from a bartender who hates seeing trucks come and go at odd hours. Old feed warehouse off Route 63. No business license." Jack felt the same cold certainty he used to feel before an op when the world goes quiet and your body becomes a tool. Olivia stepped closer and lowered her voice. "If you go," she said to Jack, "you keep your hero instincts on a leash. The dogs you saved, especially the small one, are going to crash if you disappear." Jack glanced toward the kennel run. The youngest shepherd was curled tight ribs, showing ears twitching with every distant sound like a moth waiting for the lamp to burn it again. "I'm not chasing glory," Jack said, softer than expected. "I'm chasing a door out of hell." Near midnight, Megan Reeves and Jack parked 2 blocks from the feed warehouse tucked behind a line of cottonwoods. Rain had stopped, but the world still smelled like wet dirt and electricity. The warehouse squatted under a security light that flickered as if even it didn't want to watch. Through binoculars, Jack saw a box truck backed to a side door. 2 men moved with practiced efficiency, hoods up, faces hidden, the casual body language of people who believed the law was a slow animal. A third figure emerged, a tall man in a tan work coat, mid-30s, lean with a shaved head, and a confident stride, the kind of confidence that grows in places where cruelty is rewarded. He didn't carry a weapon in sight, but he carried authority like a smell. Megan whispered, "That's not a ranch hand. That's a manager." Reeves raised his camera and began taking photos. Jack watched the side door open. A sliver of light spilled out, and with it came a sound, muffled, frantic, unmistakable dogs. More than a few. A whole choir of fear. Jack's throat tightened. He had expected a crime. He hadn't expected the scale of it. Megan's voice stayed flat, professional, but Jack heard the fury under it. "We've got probable cause," she said. "I'm calling for backup." Jack's gaze stayed locked on the door. In his mind, the moonwing of this story wasn't a leather charm. It was the way suffering makes a symbol out of itself, the way it begs to be seen. Tonight the symbol was hanging from a warehouse like a dark banner, and Jack Mercer felt the old part of him, the part trained to breach and clear, trying to rise. He swallowed it down and did the harder thing. He waited, trusting the plan, trusting the badge beside him, trusting that sometimes justice has to walk before it can run. The feed warehouse sat under a sickly security lamp, its metal skin sweating rainwater and old secrets, and Jack Mercer watched it the way sailors once watched the mouth of a storm god, silent, respectful, ready to be punished for blinking. In the back seat, Deputy Megan Hart kept her radio low and her spine straight, a lean, freckled figure with auburn hair pulled tight as discipline eyes trained on the side door where the box truck breathed exhaust like a tired dragon. Officer Daniel Reeves steadied his camera broad shoulders, hunched beard catching glints of light whenever he shifted. He looked like a man who had learned to carry sorrow without dropping it. The warehouse door cracked open again, and a chorus of muffled whines leaked out, dozens, not six. Fear stacked upon fear. Jack's hands clenched around the binoculars until his knuckles whitened. His mind tried to turn it into a mission. Angles, risks, timing, but his chest betrayed him, tightening with something older than training, pure offended compassion. "They're in there," Megan whispered. It wasn't information. It was prayer. She called in backup, her voice controlled, but her jaw worked like she was chewing nails. Within minutes, 2 unmarked SUVs arrived, tires whispering on wet pavement. A man stepped out who carried authority the way some people carried weather, inevitable. Sergeant Aaron Delgado of Oregon State Police looked early 40s, tall and thick through the chest, olive skin, close-cropped black hair, and a calm face lined by years of saying hard things to frightened people. His eyes were dark and steady, and when he spoke, it was with the measured patience of someone who had seen what panic does to good intentions. "We're not kicking down anything without legal cover," he said, voice low. Jack felt irritation flare because every second was another second of suffering, but Delgado's gaze held him firm, not as an enemy, as a leash. "Justice that survives court is still justice," Delgado added, as if reading Jack's thoughts. Megan nodded, already calling an on-call judge through dispatch, laying out the tip, the photos, the sound evidence, the lack of license, the visible loading activity. Jack listened and realized he was watching another kind of combat, words turned into warrants, patience turned into power. The paperwork moved faster than Jack expected, like the universe itself had finally gotten tired of cruelty and decided to cooperate. When Megan's radio crackled with confirmation warrant granted, Delgado's shoulders eased by a fraction. "All right," he said. "We do this clean." Jack's heartbeat thudded like a drum in his ears. He tasted metal. He hated that he was relieved to be told what to do again. Delgado assigned roles with spare language, nothing theatrical, nothing that would belong in a movie trailer, and Jack forced himself to stay behind the line he was given, because for once the hardest part of being a warrior wasn't acting, it was not acting too soon. They moved toward the warehouse in a tight, quiet tide. The door swung wider, and a tall man in a tan work coat stepped out, lean-shaved head shining under the lamp posture, relaxed in a way that wasn't peace but entitlement. Up close, he looked mid-30s, pale eyes, a thin scar slicing one eyebrow, as if someone once tried to teach him humility and failed. He carried a clipboard like a scepter, the kind of man who never got his own hands dirty, yet always smelled faintly of other people's pain. Sergeant Delgado spoke his name from a sheet of prior complaints. "Trent Voss," he said, tone flat. Trent's head snapped toward the sound, surprise flickering into a practiced sneer. "You're trespassing," Trent barked, then spotted the badges and the warrant and tried to rearrange his face into innocence. Megan stepped forward, voice like frost. We have legal authority to search the premises." Trent laughed once, sharp and short. For what some barking nuisances, Jack felt something in him go cold. He thought of Ropes, the sign, the way the youngest shepherd flinched at kindness like it was a trap. His mouth moved before he could stop it. "They're not nuisances," Jack said, quiet and lethal. "They're evidence." Trent's eyes slid to Jack's stance, to his shoulders, to the way he stood like a door that wouldn't move. A flicker of caution appeared. Predators recognized other predators. Inside the warehouse smelled of bleach and fear, like someone had tried to disinfect a sin. Rows of metal crates lined the walls, stacked 2 high each, holding a German shepherd, black and tan coats dulled by stress ears, pinned eyes bright with terror and stubbornness. Some wore heavy collars with cheap tags stamped in numbers. A few had fresh ink marks shaved into their fur inventory made flesh. One dog lunged at the bars, not attacking, just demanding to be seen. Another pressed into a corner, shaking so hard the crate rattled. Jack's throat tightened. He forced himself to breathe. Not for him, for them. Reeves moved with careful gentleness, documenting, speaking softly as if his voice could stitch wounds. Megan and Delgado followed procedure, opening crates only with control, calling in transport reading rights, securing the scene. Trent Voss tried bargaining the way cowards always do, money first, threats second. When that failed, he turned cruel, snarling that these dogs were born to obey and that discipline is necessary. Jack stared at him and for a moment heard the mythic irony of it, a man who worshipped obedience standing before a wall of animals that had survived precisely because they refused to surrender their souls. "Discipline doesn't require rope," Megan snapped. "It requires humanity." Trent's mouth twisted. "Humanity doesn't pay," he hissed. Then Delgado clicked cuffs around his wrists, and the sound was small, almost polite, yet it felt like thunder. A door opened in the back of the warehouse, another room, darker, colder. Inside were more crates and 2 ropes coiled on a table beside a splintered plank, as if someone had been preparing the next punishment display. Jack's stomach turned, but he didn't look away. He stepped back, letting the officers work because he understood something new. Heroics were loud, but rescue was often paperwork, patience, and the slow refusal to let evil write the ending. By dawn, dozens of shepherds were being loaded into warm transport vans, and the warehouse lights flickered out as if exhausted by witnessing their own shame. Jack returned to the clinic with Megan's escort and found Olivia Brooks waiting in the doorway. Curly hair loosened from its bun, face pale with fatigue, but eyes fierce with relief. The 6 dogs Jack had saved were still there, wrapped in blankets like survivors of a shipwreck. The oldest shepherd rose when Jack appeared, limping forward, head high. Jack crouched, met those amber-brown eyes, and finally let the promise become real. "Atlas," he said softly, voice rough, "because you carried the world for the others." The dog leaned in, pressing his forehead against Jack's, and for the first time Jack felt the night exhale, like even the gods of that rain-soaked forest had decided to loosen their grip. Morning arrived over Bend like a gentle apology, the rain finally loosening its grip and leaving the streets rinsed clean, as if the city itself had decided it was tired of carrying last night's ugliness. Jack Mercer stood outside the clinic with a paper cup of coffee he barely tasted, watching steam lift into the cold air. He looked worn in the soft, light jaw, still hard beard, still neatly clipped shoulders, still carrying that invisible rucksack of old missions. But there was a new crack in the armor, a quiet awe that he hadn't expected to feel again. Behind the glass doors, the rescued German shepherds were alive, fed, warmed, and for the first time in who knows how long, unafraid of footsteps that meant pain. Atlas, the older shepherd with the silvered muzzle and torn ears, moved slowly along the kennel run like a captain inspecting his crew. His eyes remained sharp and watchful, but the panic had drained out of them, replaced by something steadier, cautious dignity. Jack had named him like a vow, and Atlas seemed to understand that names could be bridges. Deputy Megan Hart arrived with sunrise on her shoulders, auburn ponytail, freshly tightened uniform, crisp despite the long night. She looked tired, but the kind of tired that comes from doing something that matters. Her freckles stood out against slightly pale skin, and her gray-green eyes held a spark of satisfaction she tried to hide behind professionalism. "Trent Voss is talking," she told Jack, voice low but bright with momentum. Not because he grew a conscience, because Delgado promised him a longer sentence if he stays quiet. Jack's mouth twitched. "Fear makes honest people," he murmured. Megan snorted softly. "Fear makes cowards," she corrected. "But I'll take a coward who hands us names." Sergeant Aaron Delgado joined them, tall and solid. his calm face unreadable in the early light. He held a folder thick with printed photos and chain of custody forms, the kind of paperwork that turns suffering into court-proof truth. "We've got leads," Delgado said. "Phone records, shipping receipts, a buyer list. This doesn't stop at Bend." Jack's chest tightened at the scale of it, then eased as Delgado continued. "And the dogs will be protected as evidence and as living beings." Olivia already filed emergency custody with the county. The words "protected and living beings" landed in Jack like warmth. Dr. Olivia Brooks stepped out, then hair loosened from its bun into dark curls that framed her tired face. Her hazel eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but her posture stayed strong like someone who refuses to fold. "I'm setting up a temporary recovery ward," she said. "We'll triage behavior as carefully as we triage wounds. Some of them are going to be brave, some are going to be terrified. All of them deserve time." Jack nodded, feeling a strange gratitude that made him uncomfortable. He had always known how to say thank you with action, not words. Inside the clinic buzzed with controlled chaos, volunteers arrived with blankets, donated kibble, and quiet hands. One of them was a woman Jack hadn't met yet, moving like sunlight in a room that had seen too much darkness. Her name was Hannah Pierce, early 30s, average height, slim build, fair-skinned, with a warm, rosy undertone and honey blonde hair cut in a practical shoulder-length wave that kept falling into her eyes. She wore a simple hoodie and jeans, no makeup except what fatigue painted naturally, and she smiled the way people do when they've learned to keep believing anyway. Hannah ran a local foster network, and she spoke to the dogs in a soft, playful voice that carried humor like a featherlight, but real. "Okay, gentlemen," she said to a cluster of nervous shepherds, "you are officially off duty. No more weird warehouse politics." One dog blinked, ears twitching, and for a second it looked almost like a laugh. Jack watched, stunned by how quickly kindness could change the air. While Megan and Delgado coordinated with animal transport and the county shelter, Olivia guided Jack through the kennels, pointing out injuries and progress. The youngest shepherd, the narrow-faced one who flinched at every motion, had finally eaten. He was only about 2 years old, black saddle bright against tan legs, eyes large and dark, like spilled coffee. "He's going to need a patient home," Olivia said. "He's not aggressive. He's terrified." Jack stared at the dog and felt the old familiar urge to fix things fast, kick down a door, pull someone out, end the threat. But healing wasn't a raid. Healing was slow. That truth scraped at him like sandpaper. Atlas approached, then limping but proud, and stood between Jack and the younger shepherd the way he always did, protective, steady. Jack crouched and let Atlas sniff his fingers. Atlas's warm breath fogged Jack's knuckles, and Jack realized his hands weren't shaking. Not today. Megan returned with new updates. "We found a second location outside town," she said. "An old training yard. We're moving in with state and federal help. This is going to break wider than we thought." Jack felt the familiar pull of action, but this time it was paired with something new: responsibility to the living, breathing results of that action. Olivia's gaze held him. "You can't carry the whole world," she said quietly. Jack almost answered with the stubborn seal pride of, "I can try." But Hannah's laughter drifted down the hall, gentle, human, and it disarmed him. "Maybe not," Jack admitted, voice rough. "But I can carry 6, and maybe a few more." Hours later, after statements were signed and transport schedules set, Jack stepped outside to load Atlas into his truck for a temporary stay. Olivia had approved it under emergency foster supervision. Atlas climbed in with a cautious dignity, then turned, watching the clinic door as if counting who was safe. When the younger shepherd hesitated at the threshold, Hannah knelt beside him, coaxing softly. Jack held his breath. The dog looked at Jack, then at Atlas, then at the open truck bed like it was a cliff. Atlas gave one low, steady huff, not a bark, not a threat, more like a promise. The younger dog took a trembling step forward, then another. And then, as if choosing life, he hopped into the truck and curled beside Atlas, pressing his body close like a child finding an older brother. Jack laughed, surprised by the sound, and the laugh came out rough but real. "All right," he said, eyes stinging in a way Rain couldn't explain. "Guess we're a team." The sun broke through the clouds, then laying gold across the wet pavement. Megan watched from the doorway, arms crossed, trying to look stern, but failing. "Don't make me regret trusting you," she called. Jack saluted her with 2 fingers, half joke, half oath. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm very regret-proof." Olivia shook her head, smiling despite herself. Hannah lifted a hand in farewell, and for a moment the world looked simple. A man, 2 dogs, and a road that finally led somewhere kinder. Jack started the engine, and Atlas stared out at the brightening sky, as if memorizing it, while the younger shepherd, still unnamed, let out a small sigh and closed his eyes. The war wasn't over, not for the courts, not for the other dogs still being found, but in that truck on that morning, hope sat like a warm living thing between them. And for the first time in years, Jack Mercer didn't feel like he was driving away from something. He was driving toward home. Some stories don't end with a gunshot or a courtroom door closing. Some end with a quiet miracle, the kind that slips into ordinary life like sunlight through blinds. Jack didn't call it a miracle at first. He called it logistics, vet bills, foster forms, training schedules, night checks to make sure a trembling German shepherd was still breathing steady. But the truth kept tapping him on the shoulder in small, holy ways. A dog who once hung from a tree learned to trust a human hand again. A broken man who once believed he only belonged to war learned he could belong to mercy. And in that slow return to life, something unmistakable appeared: God's fingerprints in the details. Because miracles aren't always the dramatic kind. Sometimes God doesn't part a sea, He parts a heart. He turns fear into courage, one breath at a time. He turns a rescue into a second chance. He turns strangers into family. And that's where this story reaches into everyday life. Most people won't face a canyon gunfight or a criminal ring, but everyone faces something that tries to hang hope from a tree: grief, loneliness, guilt, exhaustion, the feeling of being unseen. The lesson is simple and hard. You don't have to be perfect to be used by God. You just have to show up. You just have to choose the right thing when no one is watching. Kindness is not small, it's a seed, and God loves seeds. He makes forests out of them. If this story moved, you take a moment and share it with someone who needs hope today. Comment below, where are you watching from, and what part touched your heart the most? And if you believe in second chances, if you believe God can still write beauty into broken lives, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. May God bless you and your family. May He place peace in your home, strength in your heart, and light on your path. And may He protect every person watching, especially those who feel tired, alone, or afraid. Amen.